reports also exposed that Saudi Arabia had worked to hamper the rebuilding projects commissioned by Germany and Qatar in Sada. This happened after the fighting between the two warring camps came to a halt due to a ceasefire. 230 Arab League. In Egypt, the Yemeni foreign minister called for an Arab League military intervention against the Houthis. 207 Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi floated the idea of a unified military force. 231 The Arab League announced the formation of a unified military force to respond to conflict in Yemen and Libya. 232 U.S. role. Since the mid-2000s, the United States has been carrying out targeted killings of al-Qaeda militants in Yemen, although the U.S. government generally does not confirm involvement in specific attacks conducted by unmanned aerial vehicles as a matter of policy. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism documented 415 strikes in Pakistan and Yemen by 2015 since the 11th of September attacks, and according to organizations' estimates, between 423 and 962 deaths are believed to have been civilians. However, Michael Morrell, former deputy director of the CIA, affirmed that the numbers were significantly lower. 233 During the civil war in Yemen, drone strikes have continued, targeting suspected leaders of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Ibrahim al-Rabish and Nasser bin Ali al-Ansi, two leading ACAP figures, were killed by U.S. drone strikes in the vicinity of Mukalla in 2015. 234 235 Approximately 240 suspected AQ-8 militants have been killed by American drone strikes since the civil war began. 236 On 2013, Radoye al-Mutawakkil and Abdul Rashid al-Fachi, directors of Mortana, published a joint report with Open Society Foundations titled Death by Drone, detailing evidence of civilian casualties and damage to civilian objects in 9 U.S. drone strikes. 237 The United States supplied intelligence and logistical support, including aerial refueling and search and rescue for downed coalition pilots. 238 Also, U.S. revved arms sales to coalition countries. 239 In January 2016, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister stated, U.S. and UK military officials were in the command and control center responsible for the Saudi-led airstrikes in Yemen and had access to the list of targets but were not involved in the selection of targets. 240 241 242 Islamic State presence and operations. The Islamic State has proclaimed several provinces in Yemen and has urged its adherents to wage war against the Houthi movement, as well as against cities in general. 243 ISIS militants have conducted bombing attacks in various parts of the country, particularly against mosques in Sana'a. 244 245 On the 6th of October, 2015, IS militants conducted a series of suicide bombings in Aden that killed 15 soldiers affiliated with the Hadi-led government and the Saudi-led coalition. 246 The attacks were directed against the Al-Qasra Hotel, which had been a headquarters for pro-Hadi officials, and also military facilities. 246 Yemeni officials and UAE state news agency declared that 11 Yemeni and 4 United Arab Emirates soldiers were killed in Aden due to 4 coordinated Islamic State suicide bombings. Prior to the claim of responsibility by the Islamic State, UAE officials blamed the Houthis and former President Ali Abdullah Saleh for the attacks. 246 Humanitarian situation. CNN reported on the 8th of April, 2015 that almost 10,160,000 Yemenis were deprived of water, food, and electricity as a result of the conflict. The report also added per source from UNICEF officials in Yemen that within 15 days, some 100,000 people across the country were dislocated, while Oxfam said that more than 10 million Yemenis did not have enough food to eat, in addition to 850,000 half-starved children. Over 13 million civilians were without access to clean water. 247. A medical aid boat brought 2.5 tons of medicine to Aden on the 8th of April 2015. 248. A UNICEF plane loaded with 16 tons of supplies landed in Sana'a on 10 April. 249. The United Nations announced on 19 April 2015 that Saudi Arabia promised to provide $273.7 million in emergency humanitarian aid to Yemen. The UN appealed for the aid, saying 7.5 million people had been affected by the conflict and many were in need of medical supplies, potable water, food, shelter, and other forms of support. 250. On the 12th of May, 2015, Oxfam warned that the 5 days a humanitarian ceasefire was scheduled to last would not be sufficient to fully address Yemen's humanitarian crisis. 251. It has also been said that the Houthis are collecting a war tax on goods. The political analyst Abdul Ghani al-Irani affirmed that this tax is an illegal levy, mostly extortion that is not determined by the law and the amount is at the discretion of the field commanders. 252. As the war dragged on through the summer and into the fall, things were made far worse when Cyclone Shapala, the equivalent of a Category 2 hurricane, 253, made landfall on the 3rd of November 2015. According to NGO Save the Children, the destruction of healthcare facilities and a healthcare system on the brink of collapse as a result of the war will cause an estimated 10,000 preventable child deaths annually. Some 1,219 children have died as a direct result of the conflict thus far. Edward Santiago, the NGO's Yemen director, asserted in December 2016 sad smiley 254, even before the war tens of thousands of Yemeni children were dying of preventable causes. But now, the situation is much worse and an estimated 1,000 children are dying every week from preventable killers like diarrhea, malnutrition, and respiratory tract infections. In March 2017, the World Food Programme reported that while Yemen was not yet in a full-blown famine, 60% of Yemenis, or 17 million people, were in crisis or emergency food situations. 255. In June 2017, a cholera epidemic resurfaced which was reported to be killing a person an hour in Yemen by mid-June. 256. News reports in mid-June stated that there had been 124,000 cases and 900 deaths and that 20 of the 22 provinces in Yemen were affected at that time. 257. UNICEF and WHO estimated that, by 24 June 2017, the total cases in the country exceeded 200,000, with 1,300 deaths. 258, 77.7% of cholera cases, 339,061 of 436,625, and 80.7% of deaths from cholera, 1,545 of 1,915, occurred in Houthi-controlled governorates, compared to 15.4% of cases and 10.4% of deaths in government-controlled governorates, since Houthi-controlled areas have been disproportionately affected by the conflict, which has created conditions conducive to the spread of cholera. 259. On the 7th of June 2018, it was reported that the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, had pulled 71 of its international staff out of Yemen, and moved the rest of them to Djibouti, with some 450 ICRC employees remaining in the country. The partial evacuation measure came on the eve of an ICRC worker, a Lebanese national, being killed on the 21st of April by unknown gunmen in the southwestern city of Taiz. The ICRC stated, "Our current activities have been blocked, threatened and directly targeted in recent weeks, and we see a vigorous attempt to instrumentalize our organization as a pawn in the conflict." In light of the serious security deterioration for ICRC personnel, the international organization has called for all parties of conflict to provide it with concrete, solid and actionable guarantees so that it can continue working in Yemen. Since the beginning of the conflict, more than 10,000 people have been killed and at least 40,000 wounded, mostly from air raids. 260. Protest against the war in Yemen. On 14 August 2020, the International Rescue Committee stated in March that at least 9.8 million people in Yemen were acutely in need of health services. The closure of Sana'a and Riyadh airports for civilian flights and the limited operation of civilian airplanes in government-held areas made it impossible for most to seek medical treatment abroad. The cost of tickets provided by Yemeni Air Djibouti and Queen Bilqis Airways also put traveling outside Yemen out of reach for many. 261. 262. The United Nations Development Programme published a report in September 2019 that said if the war continues, Yemen will become the poorest country in the world, with 79% of the population living below the poverty line and 65% in extreme poverty by 2022. 263. On the 3rd of December, 2019, the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, Amnesty International released a report highlighting how the almost 5-year-old Yemen war has left millions of people living with disabilities and excluded from medical attention. The armed conflict led by Saudi Arabia and UAE as part of the former coalition in the Arab nation against Houthis and terror groups, has given birth to the worst humanitarian crisis, as stated by the United Nations. 264. Humanitarian aid provided to Houthi-controlled Yemen will be scaled down in March 2020 because donors doubt if it's actually reaching the people in need, UN officials said. 265. In June 2020, the UNCA said that following more than 5 years of war in Yemen, more than 3.6 million people have been forced to flee their homes, while 24 million are in dire need of aid. The group also informed that a significant gap in funding has been recorded, with only $63 million received thus far, while at least $211.9 million is needed to run the operations in 2020. 266. On the 2nd of July, 2020, Human Rights Watch reported that detainees at Aden's Bir Ahmed facility were facing serious health risks from the rapidly spreading coronavirus pandemic. The informal detention facility, controlled by Yemeni authorities affiliated with the UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council, is grossly overcrowded and was deprived of health care facilities. 267. The World Food Programme, WFP, projected in March 2021 that if the Saudi-led blockade and war continues, more than 400,000 Yemeni children under 5 years old could die from acute malnutrition before the end of the year as the blockade devastates nation. 268, 269, 270, war crime accusations. Destroyed house in the south of Sana'a, the 13th of June 2015. According to Faria al-Muslim, direct war crimes have been committed during the conflict. For example, an IDP camp was hit via Saudi airstrike, while Houthis have sometimes prevented aid workers from giving aid. 271. The UN and several major human rights groups discussed the possibility that war crimes may have been committed by Saudi Arabia during the air campaign. 272. 273. Yemeni capital Sana'a after air strikes. The 9th of October 2015. British researcher Alex Dawal wrote that the responsibility for Yemen goes beyond Riyadh and Abu Dhabi to London and Washington.